Hey everybody. Alright, so this is the Spider-Man video I've been promising you. The problem is that I recorded it on Sunday, was meaning to put the graphics together and stuff today, and then the big news hit. Now, the first thing we heard from Deadline is that talks between Marvel or Disney and Sony had collapsed over who was going to pay for the majority of the film, if it was going to be a 50-50 split, and that Kevin Feige was no longer going to be a producer on the films. And of course that sent everybody into panic because of the last two Spider-Man films being so good. And the fact that, they were good enough that I spent an entire 8 minutes talking about it on the rest of this video, which you'll see as soon as I'm done talking here. So there's the concern that Kevin Feige and Marvel won't be involved with the Spider-Man films anymore, and that Spider-Man won't be part of the MCU. Don't rush to judgment yet. Don't jump to conclusions. As it is, we just got a post from IO9, which is a pretty good, reliable source, and it says that a Sony rep has told them that it's their belief that this dispute is simply over a producer's credit, and negotiations, I can use big words, are ongoing. They further clarified that Feige has contributed to other Spider-Man-centric films, and they didn't receive a producer's credit on. So, according to IO9, or at least the source talking to IO9, the world's not on fire yet. Spider-Man, and I would be stunned to... if this really was a one-and-done type of thing, like, oh no, we can't work this out, we're done. Because there's just too much money on the table. Disney, Marvel, Sony, there's just way too much money on the table, and it just doesn't make sense for them to just walk away. So, hopefully this will get resolved, and we can go back to these great Spider-Man movies. And with that said, let's go ahead and roll into the... why Marvel is doing so great with Sony on the Spider-Man movies. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Professional Raconteur. Now today I'm going to do the bit that I've been promising, the talk about how Marvel is getting things right with Spider-Man, where Sony hasn't quite been doing as well on their own. So I'm going to get into that today, but before we get started, I ask that you subscribe on the channel, or hit the like button, or all those other things that help out a site when they're trying to get started, which I am. So any of those things you could do, you could share this with your friends, those kind of things, I would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get on to it. Again, what I want to talk about is how Marvel is getting things right with Spider-Man. Where, with Marvel and Sony, let's say that. Marvel and Sony are getting things right with Spider-Man, where Sony wasn't doing so well on their own. Now, we have to look at the fact that in the last 18 years, we've had 11 Spider-Man films. 7 with him as the lead, 3 as minor characters, those being the Avengers movies and Captain America Civil War, and then the one animated film that taps into the Spider-Verse. And while most of them have made a good amount of money for Sony, not all of them have been as well received. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a unique entity, and I'm going to put that aside for now, and focus on the live-action films with Wallcrawler as the main man on the marquee. So, let's go ahead and put that aside. I know it's a great film, I enjoyed the hell of it, and I look forward to the sequel, but we're just going to talk about the live-action ones right now. Of the live-action ones, we can break that down into 3 categories. There's the original trilogy with Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi. Then there's the pair of films with Andrew Garfield that were helmed by Mark Webb. And then the latest with Tom Holland in the suit and John Watts behind the camera. While each of these had some positive things about them, they also have some glaring flaws that Marvel seemed to figure out, or at least seem to be addressing and trying to avoid. Now, the Marvel films aren't perfect, but they stand up a bit better than the 2 sets that Sony did on their own. Now, the first thing to look at is Peter Parker himself. This is a story of a teenager who gets superpowers, fails to stop his uncle's murder, and becomes a hero weighted down by guilt and responsibility. The high school hero is a unique thing in the cinematic universe, and Marvel has chosen to stay with him for a while. Raimi, on the other hand, couldn't seem to get Peter out of high school fast enough. I mean, he moved into an apartment in New York by the third act of the first movie. Webb, on the other hand, kept him in school, but the version of Peter was a skateboard-riding outsider that was more edgy than nerdy, while Watts has given us a 15-year-old Peter that acts 15, with all the awkwardness that comes with it. While it lends itself to a series of sitcom-style moments, it makes a lot of sense for the character as he was created. This is how Stan Lee and Steve Ditko looked at Peter Parker at that point. He was a high school kid. He was the sidekick that was getting his own book instead. So, now, by staying there with Tom Holland in that age, it allows Marvel to do almost a John Waters-style high school film, and that just happens to have a superhero in it. This is very unique niche in the crowded superhero blockbuster category. And I think it's something they definitely should stay with for as long as makes sense. Now, the next thing that Marvel did differently felt wrong to me at first, but now it makes more sense. Everyone knows that Spider-Man is the web-swinging, wisecracking hero that takes on the villains that are way above his pay grade, and he just keeps going until he beats them, and he's the underdog, and that's who we want to see in the movies. But the hero's origin starts with real tragedy. The death of Uncle Ben and the knowledge that Peter could have prevented it. Had he not been so selfish, this is an almost Shakespearean beginning. And through the pages and pages of comics that we've seen, he's grown into the hero we know today. But doing that in a 2-hour movie is so much harder. This is a massive tonal switch in a mere moments. They had to take the time to build the relationship between Ben and Peter, so his death means something to the audience. And then Peter is supposed to mourn and move on to defeat the bad guy. Now, that's a lot to deal with in a 2-hour movie. Marvel never addresses Spider-Man's origin in their movies. We know Ben existed, and that he's dead. But by the time we meet Peter, he's past the mourning on to the heroics. He's already Spider-Man. He just doesn't have the cool suit. The tragedies take place in other films. They deal with it elsewhere, and only the aftermath shows up here. It goes against the history of the character, but in this medium, it works a lot better. Now, another key has to do with the villains. First, they are the creations of events in the MCU and make more sense. Adrian Toomes becomes the Vulture to provide for his family after losing almost everything when Damage Control takes over the salvage rights after superhero battles. Quentin Beck and his crew that create Mysterio do so as a result of Tony Stark's selfish actions. Actually, a lot of things in the MCU happens because of Tony Stark's selfish actions. But these characters have no real personal connection to Peter. I mean, sure, Toomes is Liz's father, and that was a neat twist, but it didn't affect Peter the same way as finding out to, say, Harry Osborn or Otto Octavius or Kirk Connors get turned into a crazed villain due to some kind of chemical reaction or explosion and betray him. I mean, every villain in Raimi's trilogy had a strong personal tie to Peter, including Sandman, who, in their version, killed Uncle Ben. And that's totally against the normal origin. And the rest of Webb's villains suited up as a result of what Spider-Man did most of the time. Watt's villains feel more natural to the universe in both origin and connection to Peter's world. But the biggest difference in Marvel is that they've remembered one of the biggest keys to the character. Peter Parker doesn't get a happy ending. Sam Raimi seemed to know that at the end of the first Spider-Man film, with Peter telling Mary Jane he can't be with her. But then they threw that out the window in the second film, and Webb totally ignored that by having Peter and Gwen hook up even after her dad died, telling Peter to stay away from her, and him just ignoring it. Now, Homecoming ends with Peter finally going out with the girl he likes, only to find out her father's a villain, and that by stopping him, she has to move away. Far From Home has him kiss MJ and look like they're going to have a good moment, only to see his entire world crash down around him seconds later. As much as Hollywood likes a happy ending, it doesn't work for this character, and Marvel isn't afraid to do him right. So, they're again sticking to what Lee and Ditko created. Of course, Marvel has the advantage of having a universe of 20 other films built up already that they can shortcut certain things, and assuming that the audience has seen the Avengers and Captain America and stuff like that. They also have 5 previous Spider-Man films to learn from. Now, the Raimi films were groundbreaking at the time, and most people have fond memories of them. But the second film with Doc Ock was almost a carbon copy of the first, and the third film was painfully bad and taints the entire trilogy. The first Webb film was different and had some good things about it, but tonally there was some issues that got much worse in the second film, and Jamie Foxx's portrayal of Electro had to be the worst villain in the franchise history. Now, between the 2 films with Watts and his 3 appearances in the other Marvel Studio films, Holland is becoming the quintessential Spider-Man in the same way that Robert Downey Jr. is cemented as Iron Man or Chris Evans as Captain America. Once again, Marvel has found the right actor, director, and tone for a character that others have failed with. Now, this bodes well for when they get around to getting the Fantastic Four back up on the screen, and I look forward to that. Now, I've really enjoyed these Spider-Man films, more so than I expected. I was a little hesitant when Marvel said that they were going to start doing Spider-Man films, because I was kind of burnt on them. We've had so many in such a short amount of time. But Holland is so refreshing as Spider-Man, and the character is so true to the comics that it kind of reinvigorated my interest in the character, and now I'm looking forward to whatever the third movie is going to be. And the fact that we haven't heard when the third movie is coming out yet, I have a feeling it will be part of Phase 4, because the way Sony wants to put these movies out. But I think something's going to have to happen that Marvel wants to keep it quiet for a little bit, or maybe they're going to announce it at D23 coming up. We'll have to wait and see. But I have a feeling it won't be as far away for another Spider-Man movies as it might seem after the San Diego Con announcement. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Spider-Man. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and again, please hit the subscribe or the like buttons, and I will be back soon with another video. I hope you guys have a great week. Have a good night.